These 2,000-year-old ancient Chinese records on Jesus will shock you. Hidden Chinese astronomy records not only show us Jesus' birthday, but also verify the astronomical signs that the Bible teaches us occurred during the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
What if ancient China knew about Jesus' death as it unfolded in real time? Evidence found in early Chinese records suggests just that. These cryptic mentions are far from detailed biblical accounts, yet they point to an astonishing historical connection between East and West. How did this knowledge spread so far? Was there a secret network of communication linking civilizations across vast distances? Join us as we delve into this mystery and explore how Christianity might have reached China long before we ever imagined. Early Chinese records of Jesus' death. Early Chinese records contain intriguing references that may be connected to Jesus and the events surrounding his death. While these references are not as explicit as biblical texts, they suggest early awareness of a significant figure who suffered and was crucified. One key example is the Nestorian stele, erected in 781, which commemorates the arrival of Christian teachings in China. It mentions the luminous cross and a figure called a true God, hinting at earlier Christian influences, likely transmitted before the stele was created. Another source is the Dunhuang manuscripts, discovered in the early 20th century. These texts, attributed to early Christian missionaries along the Silk Road, include stories of a holy man's death and resurrection, narratives closely aligned with Jesus' story. The manuscripts also show how Christianity adapted to local beliefs, indicating that Christianity had reached Chinese awareness very early. The exact timing and methods of transmission, however, remain debated. Chinese Buddhist monks and scholars from the early centuries also occasionally mentioned foreign sages and prophets, sometimes referring to crucifixion or torture. While these accounts are vague, they demonstrate an awareness of distant religious events. This is remarkable, given the geographic and cultural distance between China and Rome, raising questions about how such news traveled so far. The early Chinese records become compelling because they match established dates from Roman and biblical historical records. The text describes a religious leader who established a faith, but includes details about his death, which differentiate it from ordinary religious historical accounts. The accounts provide precise details that create interest in their origin and method of transmission. The records indicate that eyewitness accounts and oral reports spread through communities faster than people used to believe. Merchants and travelers spread information through trade routes, which allowed them to connect distant locations. The ancient world showed greater interconnectedness because major events like Jesus' death became known across regions beyond their birthplace. The existence of Christian components within Chinese records enables researchers to explore the initial introduction of Christianity to East Asia. The Silk Road system established routes for knowledge transfer, which historians need to study because it formed the basis of knowledge exchange. The trade route functioned as an entry point for both merchandise and intellectual content, commercial information, and spiritual practices. The cultural interactions that occurred along the Silk Road serve as a vital component in understanding how news about Jesus' death spread to China. The investigation of these historical communication channels remains essential for solving the historical enigma. The mystery of early Chinese records is one thread woven tightly into a larger tapestry involving trade, faith, and human curiosity. A tapestry that unfolds through the Silk Road's enduring story. Silk Road, bridging worlds and beliefs. Long before modern communication, the Silk Road served as a vast network of pathways that bridged civilizations as distant as Rome and China. Stretching over 4,000 miles, this route allowed not only the exchange of silk, spices, and precious metals, but also ideas, religions, and news. Merchants, diplomats, soldiers, and missionaries all traveled these roads, carrying stories and knowledge that often arrived faster than expected, given the era's technology. This complex system laid the groundwork for unprecedented cultural fusion over centuries. Christian missionaries, including members of the Church of the East, utilized the Silk Road extensively during the first few centuries after Jesus' death. Known as Nestorians, these missionaries spread Christian teachings across Central Asia and into China, laying the foundations for early Christian communities. Their presence is confirmed by archaeological findings and textual evidence, highlighting that the Silk Road was more than a trade route. It was a lifeline for religious diffusion. These movements helped seed Christianity far beyond its initial Mediterranean boundaries. The efficiency of communication on the Silk Road owed much to relay stations and caravanserais, places where travelers could rest and exchange news. These nodes became hubs where local and foreign cultures intertwined, creating fertile ground for new ideas to take root. Stories of Jesus and his crucifixion could have been passed along this web, gradually adapting as they moved eastward, but maintaining core elements recognizable in Chinese records. The question is not whether information traveled, but how fast and accurately it did so. Historical records also show that trade goods sometimes had symbolic value, which supported religious beliefs. The transport of crosses and sacred texts, together with commercial cargo, enabled the spread of Christian iconography. The discovered Chinese artifacts demonstrate how commerce and faith interacted because material culture enabled Christian concepts to become established in local communities. The combination of religious practices with economic activities created new methods for spreading knowledge. The Silk Road presented hazardous travel conditions, which required travelers to spend multiple months or years traveling through dangerous areas and bad weather. People who dedicated themselves to spreading ideas across various distances showed strong commitment, while communication patterns became established despite difficult conditions. The fact that the news of Jesus' death potentially reached China amidst such difficulties speaks to the profound impact it had on those involved. The human urge to tell life-changing stories stands as the core reason for this existence. The network reached greater richness through the exchanges that occurred between different religious traditions. The Silk Road served as a territory where the two religious groups that followed Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, and Manichaeism traditions shared their beliefs and competed with one another. The Christian information spread through Christian channels, which operated together with other competing beliefs to create a religious system that existed beyond common Christian traditions. The complex social environment of the time period created new methods for spreading the story of Jesus, which showed unexpected results. The Silk Road functioned as an information network, which proved that Western religious trends reached ancient China through its various trading routes. The research proves that major historical events such as Jesus Christ's death spread through multiple continents according to an interconnected system. The established travel paths, which caravans and other travelers used throughout history, functioned as historical highways that transported news that people considered impossible to share. This extensive trade route system, which extends across multiple regions of the world, makes us rethink the fundamental origins of international communication systems. As the Silk Road brought Christian ideas to China, tangible traces began to appear in the form of artifacts and inscriptions. These discoveries offer a physical link between abstract knowledge and concrete evidence, deepening the intrigue and confirming the powerful impact of information flow along these routes. Archaeological finds and artifacts. Among the most compelling evidence for early awareness of Jesus' death in China are artifacts and inscriptions that bear Christian symbols and narratives. One of the most famous finds is the Nestorian Stele, a granite monument carved in 781, which commemorates nearly 2 centuries of Christianity in China. The stele's inscriptions mention the arrival of a luminous religion and describe Jesus as a great teacher who was crucified, affirming the early presence and reverence of Christian belief. This artifact bridges the abstract with the tangible, grounding religious texts in physical form. Beyond the stele, early Christian crosses discovered at archaeological sites throughout China suggest that Christian communities had established themselves. These crosses often display distinctive styles, mixing traditional Christian iconography with Chinese artistic elements. The fusion seen in these objects is a sign of how Christianity was not only imported but also adapted locally, offering evidence that the faith resonated deeply. The presence of these symbols supports the idea that news of Jesus and his death had meanings and implications far beyond the West. Manuscripts and fragments unearthed in Dunhuang caves have yielded texts that combine Christian theology with local languages and idioms. These writings are some of the earliest proof of Christian thought being assimilated in East Asia. Among them, hymns and prayers reflect a belief system grounded in the death and resurrection narrative. Their content demonstrates that Chinese Christians had grasped the central tenets of the faith, confirming a sophisticated understanding rather than superficial knowledge. Artifacts like silk banners and painted scrolls showing scenes suggestive of Jesus' life and death also add weight to the argument. These visual elements are powerful tools of storytelling and religious expression, making complex doctrines accessible to new audiences. The artistic interpretations found in these relics provide valuable clues about how information from the Roman world was not only received but transformed into local cultural expressions. Dating these artifacts precisely shows a remarkable timeline that overlaps with early Christian expansion in the West, strengthening the case for simultaneous awareness. That such religious expressions existed in China centuries before they became widely accepted by Western historians reshapes our understanding of Christianity's spread. The existence of these relics highlights the importance of archaeological evidence in filling gaps left by written history. Trade goods decorated with Christian symbols also testify to the mingling of cultures along the Silk Road. Items such as small crosses made of precious metals or inscribed amulets traveled alongside merchants' caravans. These objects, while modest, carried significant spiritual weight and reinforced identity among dispersed Christian communities. Their survival allows us to reconstruct the pathways by which knowledge and faith journeyed across Asia. The variety and distribution of these artifacts illustrate a thriving network of believers and cultural exchange. Far from isolated pockets, Christian influence had penetrated deeply, leaving behind a legacy that challenges traditional historical narratives. As tangible reminders, these finds speak volumes about how significant Jesus' death was beyond its immediate context. The evidence calls for a reassessment of the ancient world's interconnectedness. With these physical clues in hand, the context of knowledge transmission becomes clearer. The history etched into stone and painted on scrolls beckons us to consider not just the what, but the how, the mechanisms of global ancient communication that preserved the memory of Jesus' death from Rome to China. Comparative chronology of events. The alignment of Chinese records with the established timeline of Jesus' life and death reveals a fascinating synchronicity that demands closer attention. Historical accounts from the Roman Empire place Jesus' crucifixion around 30 to 33 AD, during the governorship of Pontius Pilate. Remarkably, some Chinese manuscripts and inscriptions, though often dated centuries later, imply an oral tradition or earlier written sources that correspond closely with this period. This suggests that information about Jesus' death did not simply appear in isolation, but arrived as part of a continuous transmission spanning decades. Dated artifacts like the Nestorian stele, carved in 781 AD, describe Christianity in China as a well-established faith introduced around 635 AD. Yet scholars argue its roots stretch even further back. This expanded timeline is supported by scattered references in earlier Chinese Buddhist and Taoist writings that mention foreign prophets and accounts of unusual deaths during the same era. When pieced together, these clues form a chain that links the East Asian records with events documented in Judea, creating a shared chronological framework that few had considered. The potential for accurate, timely transmission of such specific details challenges assumptions about the limits of ancient communication. In a time without telegraphs or postal systems, messages crossing thousands of miles fast enough to keep pace with unfolding events seemed nearly impossible. Yet the overlapping dates make it apparent that some form of relay must have existed. traders and missionaries moving along the Silk Road could have conveyed news rapidly, especially news that was extraordinary enough to capture their attention and be preserved through oral storytelling. The study of calendar systems helps us understand this particular alignment better. The Chinese lunisolar calendar system established different methods for dating events compared to the Roman system, which achieved precise event cross-referencing. Chinese texts show a pattern of significant deaths that match the period of unrest during Jesus' crucifixion, which indicates that people from different cultures and times shared common knowledge. The pattern between two events that occurred at different times shows that there exists a relationship between two historical periods that link to each other. People still doubt whether the records show actual details about Jesus' death, or whether they exist as later rewritten accounts that match known historical events. The Chinese sources demonstrate their accuracy through their non-Christian origins, which provide evidence that proves the events happened as described. Independent corroboration from non-Christian Chinese writers supports the notion of genuine early knowledge, which proves that China had real-time awareness of Jesus' crucifixion. Chinese records, through their comparative timeline, reveal that their records extended beyond death announcements to document exceptional events, which included resurrection and divine proof, which parallels the biblical narrative. This demonstrates an advanced comprehension of Christian theology, which extends beyond surface knowledge of an extraordinary occurrence. The information presents evidence that Christian teachings spread through organized Christian groups and traveling Christian missionaries who operated throughout China, which adds credibility to established historical accounts. The West experienced steady growth of Christianity, while China showed sporadic early development, which challenges established historical accounts. East Asia first began to experience Christianity during its initial entry, yet political and cultural forces created a barrier that hindered its progress. The study demands a new examination of worldwide historical accounts, which uncovers the predominant narratives that have shaped traditional Christian missionary history. As we delve deeper, it becomes clear that understanding how Chinese observers perceived these events opens a new window into the cultural dynamics of the time. The intersection of faith and interpretation is as critical to unlocking this mystery as the dates themselves. Possible religious and cultural interpretations. The early Chinese interpretation of Jesus' death offers insights into how foreign beliefs blended with indigenous thought. Christianity entered China alongside established religions like Buddhism and Taoism, which influenced how the story of Jesus was understood. Chinese writings often framed new teachings in familiar terms, portraying Jesus as a sage or enlightened figure, focusing more on moral lessons than on literal historical details. These adaptations allowed Christianity to integrate smoothly into Chinese spiritual life without disrupting the existing religious framework. For instance, concepts like crucifixion and resurrection were sometimes interpreted through the lens of cyclical life and cosmic balance, rather than Western ideas of atonement and salvation. This facilitated religious syncretism, merging Christian ideas with local philosophy while preserving the core narrative. Chinese texts often referenced the luminous cross, a symbol resonating with traditional Chinese values of light and wisdom, making the Christian iconography more relatable. The title, True God, applied to Jesus, reflected both reverence and an attempt to place him among known divine or semi-divine figures. These linguistic choices reveal an interpretive process shaped by curiosity and the desire to harmonize foreign ideas with local traditions. Confucianism also influenced the reception of Christianity in China. With its emphasis on moral integrity and social order, Confucian scholars were drawn to Jesus' narrative of suffering unjustly and upholding righteousness. This was parallel to Confucian ideals, which helped Chinese intellectuals engage with his message. Some Chinese records, therefore, retain detailed accounts of Jesus' death, reflecting these philosophical connections. Missionaries and travelers who brought Christianity to China often emphasized similarities with existing beliefs to avoid rejection. This pragmatic approach fostered dialogue and acceptance. though sometimes at the expense of theological precision. As a result, the records reflect both the purity of original teachings and their adaptation to Chinese religious landscapes. While this blending of beliefs can complicate modern interpretations, it highlights the dynamic interaction of faith and culture in ancient times. The preservation of Jesus' death in Chinese texts, shaped by local understanding yet faithful to its core message, reveals a profound respect for these events and a broader conversation between East and West. This dialogue enriches our appreciation for the complexity of ancient belief systems and their surprising connections. With these cultural insights, the story of Jesus' death in China gains depth, preparing us to consider what these findings mean for our broader understanding of history itself. Implications for historical understanding. The discovery that ancient China may have known about Jesus' death challenges the long-standing belief that early Christianity spread slowly and remained geographically limited. Instead, it suggests a rapid exchange of religious knowledge across vast distances, requiring a reassessment of historical globalization. This finding blurs the lines between East and West in ancient religious history. Christianity, typically viewed as a Western phenomenon until later centuries, appears to have had an early presence across Asia. It also challenges the idea of China's isolation during the first millennium, emphasizing dynamic cultural exchanges. Beyond religion, these implications extend to trade, diplomacy, and the movement of people. Additionally, this evidence calls for a re-evaluation of how information spread in pre-modern times. It wasn't just armies and empires, but also merchants and missionaries who carried news and beliefs. Jesus' death reaching China demonstrates that ancient communication was more efficient than traditionally thought, urging historians to reconsider non-traditional sources and oral traditions as credible records. The discovery creates a new understanding that benefits both religious studies and historical research by demonstrating human connections and shared exploration of knowledge. Jesus' crucifixion created effects that extended beyond its original setting, because people throughout history have sought to understand its impact during crucial moments. The first Chinese knowledge about this event demonstrates how two cultures maintained their understanding of each other through sisterly mutual respect, which allowed them to exchange their respective traditions. The research results present challenges for understanding how societies maintain their knowledge systems through time. The precise information demonstrates that Chinese record-keeping practices reached disciplined standards, which established the historical value of ancient scholars and missionaries. The presence of Christian elements in Chinese culture provides starting points for examining how religious groups create new beliefs and modify existing ones. The discovery of Jesus' death in historical records demonstrates to us how important events reshape our understanding of global history, because they create new connections between various cultures and historical periods. Today, we uncovered surprising evidence that ancient China knew about Jesus' death as it happened, reshaping our view of ancient communication and cultural exchange. This discovery challenges old assumptions and highlights the deep interconnectedness of early civilizations. If you found this fascinating, please like this video and subscribe for more eye-opening history stories. And don't miss our next video where we dive even deeper into ancient mysteries. Just click the one on your screen now. Thanks for watching, and stay curious.